I am Isabel Morgan, 35 years old, and right during my grandfather's will reading, the founder of the prestigious real estate corporation Morgan Development, I was exposed before hundreds of eyes. Isabel is not blood of the Morgan family. My sister only adopted her when her father was in prison. Those words didn't just hit me like a slap. They tore apart every memory and every belief I had clung to for 30 years. The people who once called me family only looked at me like a stranger. Have you ever been denied your existence by those closest to you? Leave a comment below if you have ever had to swallow your anger in silence. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow my journey as I shed all prejudice, quietly build an empire, and confront those who tried to bury me. I grew up in a picturesque house located in the northern suburbs of New York City. Everything looked perfect from the outside. Lawns trimmed meticulously, tall iron gates covered in climbing roses, and weekend cocktail parties attended by prominent businessmen and politicians. But behind those doors, I was never part of the family portrait. I was just a faint pencil sketch overshadowed by the glossy paint of the real heirs. I was adopted as a baby, which I once thought was an act of love. But as I grew older, I realized the truth wasn't like what storybooks told children. At family breakfasts, when Clark and Henry were allowed to speak about grandfather's new projects, I was reminded, Isabel, don't spill orange juice on the ledgers again. I was 16 when I heard that, holding in my hands my own blueprints for an eco-friendly housing project that Morgan Company later executed, of course, under someone else's name. I was a good student, not just pretty good as people praised casually, but truly good. I was top of my architecture class for 3 years in high school, won the statewide design competition at 17. I received a full scholarship to a prestigious school in Chicago, where no one knew I was adopted, the lost Isabel of the Morgan family. There I was simply Isabel, a student majoring in green architecture, fascinated by environmentally friendly structures and smart technology integration in residential design. I once thought that maybe if I tried hard enough, studied well enough, achieved high enough, they would see me. I was wrong. Every holiday I returned home, I brought projects, ideas, and drawings highly praised by professors, hoping to contribute to the family business. I remember once bringing back a model of a smart house powered by solar energy and natural light regulation to save costs. My adoptive mother glanced over it and turned away, saying, "That's lovely, dear. But Morgan Development doesn't build houses for scientists." Those words hit my chest like cold water. My father said nothing, just flipped the Wall Street Journal and kept reading as if I didn't exist in the room. I witnessed Clark, my cousin 6 years older, bring a sloppy, error-filled presentation lacking data to a family meeting. He took less than 10 minutes to get my father's pat on the shoulder and a remark. "Good idea. Let me talk to legal about approving the file." Meanwhile, I spent 2 months researching market trends on suburban eco-friendly housing, making detailed plans, costing tables, and perspective designs. When I gave the file to my father, he put it down after 3 pages and said, "You don't understand the business world, Isabel. Just focus on your drawings." That's a sentence I heard repeatedly for years. I once asked my mother, "Why does father never let me present my plans to the company board?" She just shook her head, shrugged, and whispered as if afraid someone might overhear, "There are things you don't need to try to understand. You are kind, smart, but they have their own plans." That answer kept me awake for nights. Their own plans? So what was I in those plans? Every wall in that house was covered with family photos. Hunting trips in Montana, golf outings in Palm Springs, award ceremonies at national real estate conferences. I appeared in a few photos, but mostly standing on the edge of the frame or looking away. I realized that when I was 20, when a college friend came over and quietly asked, "Why don't you look like anyone in your family?" I smiled, but inside I was choking. There were moments I almost believed what they said, that I didn't belong to that world, that I was just a beautiful drawing placed in the wrong room. But there was a part of me, the deepest, most resilient part, that refused to accept that. I don't know what kept me going whenever I wanted to give up. Maybe it was survival instinct. Maybe it was the image of my birth mother I had never met. Maybe it was the pain of rejection, etched like a faint red thread pulling me forward. I taught myself everything about finance, construction, legal matters, negotiation, secretly copying old company contracts from the library. I spent unpaid summer internships at a small architecture firm in Brooklyn to learn real project management. No one in the family knew, and I didn't see the need to tell them. I had started building my own path, small, rugged, but mine. I was not Morgan's biological child. I was not blessed, not supported, not handed a clear path. But I had the courage of someone pushed aside who still chose to stay. I believed that value does not lie in blood but in the courage to turn tears into strength. And I began doing just that, in silence, step by step, unbeknownst to them. I prepared for that presentation as if my entire future depended on it. Each slide was meticulously designed, every figure verified from 3 different sources, and the 3D model I built myself through 2 sleepless weeks. It was a project I believed would change Morgan Group's image, pull the company out of old routines, and lead them into an era of sustainable construction. A residential community integrated with solar power, rainwater recycling, eco-friendly materials, and designs adapted to climate change. Not just a plan but my passion through many years of study. I was scheduled to present on Monday, the official board meeting. Held on the 22nd floor of headquarters, the glass room overlooked all of Manhattan as a reminder of who truly held power. I wore a light gray vest, pinned with a small leaf-shaped brooch, a symbol of green design that I knew no one in that room cared about. When I entered, everyone was already there. Morgan, my adoptive father, sat at the head of the table, flanked by Clark and Henry, 2 cousins who never hid their contempt. Across sat Miss Louise, the financial director, and Uncle Martin, Mr. Morgan's younger brother, who often called himself the family's rational scale. I stood at the other end, plugged in my USB to the projector, hands trembling slightly but voice steady. I started with numbers. Sustainable housing growing 17% annually, market demand twice supply, and expansion potential to Western states. I spoke of the future, profit, environmental responsibility, and brand reputation. I presented a long-term cost comparison between traditional and green construction, showing up to 38% savings over 10 years. I still remember the moment I finished. I stood silently for a few seconds as they absorbed the information. But the first thing to break the silence was not a question or a professional comment. Clark leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and scoffed. Are we really listening to someone who isn't a Morgan presenting the future of Morgan Group? Ridiculous. The room seemed to freeze. I don't know who laughed first, only that the laughter spread like wildfire. I looked to Uncle Martin, pleading with my eyes, but he avoided mine, fiddling with his watch as if checking the time. My adoptive father put his pen down, not looking at me but staring out the window. You did well presenting, Isabel, he said evenly, without emotion. But you need to understand this. Strategic decisions cannot come from someone who has never borne real responsibility. Morgan Group is the culmination of many generations, not a place for testing illusions. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. This project is not an illusion, Father. This is a well-founded direction, carefully calculated and reflecting current market needs. If we delay, competitors will get ahead. Henry sneered. Who does she think she is? Elon Musk, maybe? Laughter erupted again. This time I clearly heard Louise chuckling behind her notebook. I looked down at the table, feeling my blood freeze. I didn't know what hurt more, being denied my efforts or the way they treated me as if I had never really belonged at that table. My father folded his arms, looking at me like a professor reviewing a failed thesis. You have talent, Isabel. But perhaps you forget your place. You do not represent this board. And though we know you have heart alone is not enough to lead a whole corporation. I stayed silent, swallowing the pain rising all the way up my throat. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the figure of a father in his eyes. Just a man clinging so tightly to power that he had forgotten what it meant to be human. The meeting ended with a bland nod and one sentence. Scrap this project. Focus on the Tampa development plan. I quietly gathered my files, USB, laptop, and walked out as the others were already chatting about weekend golf. That night, I noticed my company email had stopped updating. The project management system I used to track progress was locked. Even my internal account had been removed from the admin group. I called IT. They said, there's been a direct order from the top. You no longer have access. I asked who gave the order. There was silence on the other end for a long moment, then the line went dead. I sat still in my office, a tiny room at the end of the hallway, windowless, with a nameplate so faded you could barely read it. Years of dedication to this company, skipping meals and sleep, putting youth on hold, taking on the jobs no one else wanted, had ended with one clean strike of deletion. A few days later, at an internal event, I walked in and the receptionist looked up at me, confused. "Do you have an appointment?" I stood there, clutching my folder. "I'm Isabel Morgan." She checked the list, then looked up with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry. I don't see your name on the guest list." I took a step back. It was clear. They hadn't just erased me from the system. They had started erasing me from collective memory. I walked out of the building that afternoon, the sky overcast, the smell of rain lingering on the pavement. I stood there for a long time among the rush of traffic and the noise of car horns, feeling like the world had just slammed a door shut in my face. And in that moment I knew I could never go back. I left New York on a gray morning while the city was still asleep. No goodbyes, no one at the door waving, no phone calls asking where I was headed. I left a single key in the drawer of my old office and took only 3 things: a suitcase heavy with blueprints, a notebook filled with 8 years of ideas, and an old photo of a woman I'd never met, my birth mother, Evelyn. I chose Atlanta not because I knew anyone there, but because it was far enough for the name Morgan to mean nothing, and close enough for me to start over without having to explain who I was. I rented a small apartment above an old bakery in Inman Park. Low ceilings, cracked walls, a water heater that rattled every time it turned on, but to me it was freedom. I remember that first night. I sat by the window, drinking instant coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, looking out onto a quiet street where no one knew I had once stood in grand halls or been humiliated in boardrooms. Here I wasn't the adopted Morgan daughter. I was just a woman alone, broke, with a dream and a new name to start again. I named my company after my birth mother. Evelyn Design. Not Morgan Development. No group, no corporation. Just a small, simple name, but it was mine. The part of me they had tried to bury. With the modest savings left in my account, I rented a corner of a friend's woodshop, someone I knew from college. He ran a local carpentry studio. I built a desk with my own hands, hung old drawings on the wall, and set up a faded desk lamp. My first office was barely big enough for a chair, a beat-up laptop, and a few recycled material samples. But every time I walked in, I felt like I was touching something real. I started with the smallest jobs: converting a storage shed into a painter's studio, repairing the ceiling of a tiny coffee shop in Edgewood, redesigning an old apartment into a co-working space for a startup team. I did everything: modeling, rendering, hiring labor, sourcing materials, supervising construction. I didn't have a team. I was the team. One afternoon, I was repainting the front door of an indie bookstore when the owner, Marla, walked up with a cup of iced tea. She handed it to me and chuckled. "You don't look like an architect. More like someone about to open a handyman shop." I laughed, wiping paint off my arm. "I'm learning to be both." She sat down beside me, looking at the blueprint I was folding. "You do all this alone?" I nodded. She studied me for a moment, then said softly, "Then you're stronger than you think." I didn't say anything, but that sentence held me up through many nights after. Nights when a client pulled out because of missing insurance. Nights I fell asleep on the office floor revising a bid just before the deadline. Nights when my account balance dipped below $500 and my heart beat like a hammer inside my chest. But I didn't quit. I took every job, no matter how small. I talked to carpenters like friends, learned to negotiate material prices, knew which place sold cheaper cement on Tuesdays, and got to know every shop owner in the area. Gradually, people started remembering the name Evelyn Design. Not because of flashy ads, but because each small project carried something honest, careful, and refreshingly unlike the cookie-cutter plans from big firms. A young couple reached out after seeing a sample apartment I had renovated in West End. They said, "We need someone who understands that a house isn't just a place to live. It's where you grow up together." I looked at them and remembered all those times I stood outside Morgan's boardrooms, being told, "Design isn't about emotion." And I realized the very thing they saw as my weakness was what kept me going. Each project, each client, each referral became the thread that tied me to this city. I was no longer a shadow on the sidelines. I was building, not just walls and roofs, but my own dignity. I woke up every morning to the ding of the toaster downstairs, brewed a cup of coffee, sat in front of my sketches, and knew I was truly living my own life, not some version crafted by someone else. And with each day, each brick laid, I knew I was getting closer to something bigger than revenge. I was creating something they could no longer ignore. I don't know exactly when Evelyn began to grow. It all happened slowly, quietly, like a seed pushing through the soil, soundless but unstoppable. One successful project led to the next. One satisfied client brought in 3 more. No flashy billboards, no industry connections, just real spaces that made people feel like they could finally breathe, live in sync with their lives. I followed one philosophy: building isn't just about sheltering from the sun and rain. It's about breathing, about living in tune with the environment, the needs, and the feelings of those inside. The people who came to me had all been overlooked. Young couples wanting kid-friendly renovations, cafe owners needing space for community workshops, or a solo photographer needing a live-in studio to save on rent. They chose Evelyn not for the name but for how we listened. No hollow promises, no flash. Just sketches, time, and commitment down to the smallest detail. I hired a young engineer who'd been cut from a large firm for refusing to follow old standards. I partnered with a team of Haitian craftsmen who specialized in recycled materials. We were alike: undervalued, dismissed, and searching for a place solid enough to stand without bowing. Within 14 months, Evelyn had signed over 30 renovation contracts and 6 new construction projects across Atlanta and nearby regions. I hired 2 more architects, a part-time marketing coordinator, and moved our office from a dusty corner into a glass-fronted studio on Peachtree Street. I still kept the old desk, the one I sketched my first plan under dim yellow light, as a reminder. Even as Evelyn gained recognition in the local construction world, I guarded one truth closely: no one could know I was once Isabel Morgan. To everyone in Atlanta, I was Isabel Evelyn, a self-made woman from modest roots, building a company from the ground up. I never lied, but I never volunteered. I declined interviews, turned down articles, only accepted projects from clients who cared about our work, not my past. One person once asked, "Where did you study?" I smiled: "Somewhere old that taught me a lot about who not to become." And then one summer afternoon, while I was reviewing drawings with my assistant for a small housing development in the suburbs of Decatur, he blurted out as he scrolled through the city's bid list, "Did you know Morgan Group just lost 3 contracts in a row? They thought they had them locked down but ended up losing all of them. It's wild." I looked up. 3 contracts. Yeah. One in Savannah, one suburban community up north, and the last one, it's the smart housing renovation project we just won. I froze. I opened the bidding documents again. Who was that project? The client ID was familiar. But I had never looked closely at which companies had submitted bids. I had been so focused on our part that I forgot to even check who our competitors were. I stared at the screen. In that moment, a wave of emotion surged. Not gloating, not anger, but a silent shock. No one at Morgan had any idea that the project they lost to a no-name company was mine. None of them knew that the name Evelyn, the one they had brushed past, ignored, or dismissed, belonged to the daughter they once said, "has no place discussing company business." I couldn't help but wonder who had submitted that bid on behalf of Morgan Group. Clark? Henry? Or was it my father himself? Had any of them actually read the proposal? Had they looked at the renderings from Evelyn, read the lines about sustainable construction and thought, "This feels familiar"? Or did they just scroll past, the same way they had scrolled past me for years? That night, I sat alone in the studio. The dim light cast long shadows over the blueprints pinned to the wall, quiet testaments to a journey I had never dared to speak out loud. I looked at them all, every project, every design, every client feedback. I didn't feel the satisfaction I imagined. I didn't feel the urge to boast. I just felt my heart beating faster than usual, like a door had just creaked open. I turned on my laptop and opened the biggest real estate news site in the industry. Just like my assistant said, a bold headline appeared: "Morgan Group fails to secure 3 major projects. Time to rethink strategy?" I read through the article. My name wasn't mentioned. There was no reference to Evelyn. We were still a shadow, quietly stepping into a world that had once shut its doors on us. But I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew I was re-entering old territory, this time not as someone begging to be accepted. I didn't want them to see me, not yet. I wanted them to feel my presence like a strange wind, unseen but strong enough to shake branches. And by the time they scrambled to trace its source, it would already be too late. I started paying attention to the names showing up in interview requests. First was a structural engineer who had worked for Morgan Group's West Division. He said he wanted to pursue more human-centered designs. Then came a young project manager who used to oversee luxury developments in the Carolinas. She said she was tired of building cold, lifeless plans just to appease shareholders. They didn't know who I was. They just knew Everlyn was the one place that saw their worth without asking for credentials or titles. I didn't ask why they left Morgan Group. I only asked what they wanted. And when they said they wanted to create something meaningful, I nodded. Then let's do that, I told them without hesitation. One person. Then 7. We slowly formed a strange little team. No fancy resumes, no glittery nameplates. Just experience, self-respect, and a shared hurt of once being cast aside in a cold system. They didn't come for the money. They stayed because they knew they weren't overlooked anymore. I remember our first team meeting when we reached 8 people. We sat around a round wooden table in our new studio, surrounded by material samples, rolled-up plans, and a half-eaten pizza box. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I won't promise huge success, I said. But I will promise no one here will be abandoned when things get hard. No one needs to prove their worth here. We work together because we know the world outside won't wait for anyone to earn its approval. No one spoke. But I saw their eyes. Some were misty, some just nodded quietly. In the following months, Everlyn grew fast enough that I had to hire a human resources coordinator, an in-house accountant, and set up a separate build team. We didn't take on too many projects at once. Every job was managed down to the last brick. But every finished build left a mark. Whether it was a small home in the suburbs or a co-working space for a startup, people felt that someone had truly listened to them in every corner. Then one day, a quiet email landed in my inbox from a well-known address, Glencross Capital Investment Group. The message was brief, professional, and invited a meeting to discuss Everlyn's growth potential and possible expansion into the southeastern U.S. market. I didn't respond immediately. I read through their portfolio, reviewed their past investments, and agreed to meet after 2 weeks of consideration. The meeting was held in a private conference room at the Four Seasons Hotel. They weren't flashy. They didn't ask for controlling shares. They just wanted to partner, offer capital to open new branches in Nashville, Charlotte, and Jacksonville. I set my terms. I retain full control of staffing, brand direction, and design philosophy. Their lead rep nodded without pause. We're investing in that value, not the spreadsheets. After the meeting, as I was packing up my notes, one of their team, a man named Peter, asked gently, "Can I ask something out of curiosity?" I looked at him, waiting. "Did you ever have ties to Morgan Group?" Everlyn's style. It feels new, but also like a subtle rebuttal. I didn't flinch. I lived near companies like that. And I wanted to build something different. Peter smiled. "I understand. We've heard Morgan Group's been getting very uncomfortable with the name Everlyn." I froze. "Heard from where?" "We have investment relationships with a few of their partners. There's word they've hired a research firm to find out who's behind Everlyn. They don't know who you are. But they can tell. This company understands them too well." I was quiet for a moment. Not surprised. Just a chill down my spine, realizing I had fully stepped into the zone I once avoided. That night, I sat alone on the rooftop, looking out over the golden lights of Atlanta. A half-finished glass of wine in my hand. A breeze swept through, and the noise of the city below rang out like a strange, familiar soundtrack. I thought about the old faces, Clark Henry, Mr. The people who once believed I would always be the girl standing outside the door. Now they were looking for me, but not under the name Isabel Morgan. They were searching for, who's behind Everlyn. And they had no idea. That person used to sit one seat away, unheard, unseen. I didn't feel joy. Or fear. I just felt an eerie calm. The game they once controlled had changed. I woke up that Monday morning like any other day with the smell of coffee from downstairs and sunlight slicing through the window blinds. My phone on the nightstand kept blinking, but I didn't rush. I wasn't used to people coming to me first thing in the morning. I brewed a cup, opened my laptop to check the latest drawings for the Nashville project, and then the notifications hit. Over 300 unread emails. I blinked and opened my inbox. In under 8 hours, my company name had made headlines across dozens of online media outlets. The mysterious woman behind Evelyn, the company outpacing Morgan Group. I opened the article. The author was a veteran journalist in the real estate industry, known for contributing regularly to Built America magazine. In the piece, he referred to a startup with groundbreaking design strategies, user-first philosophy, and a track record of outbidding 3 major competitors to secure key contracts in the southeastern United States. Midway through the article, one bold line stood out. And the founder of Evelyn, the quiet but daring woman behind it all, is Isabel Morgan, once a member of the founding family of Morgan Group. I don't remember exactly how I felt in that moment. Part of me went numb. I sat motionless, staring at the sentence like I was staring into a mirror. No place left to hide. The article spread faster than I expected. By late morning, dozens of outlets had picked it up. Forbes, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, Architect Digest. They echoed the original story, adding public data. My name and company filings, images from conferences, footage from my talk at the Green Tech Forum in Austin. And of course, side-by-side comparisons between Morgan Group's recent failures and Evelyn's growing list of wins. By noon, I was in a meeting with the project team when the door swung open. Natalie, my assistant, stepped in looking visibly shaken. "Isabel, you need to see this." She handed me an iPad already open to a CNN article. The cover photo showed me in profile during a presentation. Below it, in bold lettering, "From Cast Out to Contender, Isabel Morgan and the Rise of Evelyn." The room went silent. I set the iPad down on the table and looked around. "No one here needs to change how they work," I said calmly. "We're still Evelyn. We do this for the people who believe in us, not for the headlines." A few people smiled faintly. Natalie nodded, and the meeting went on like nothing had happened. But I knew everything had changed. That afternoon, just as I was leaving the office, my phone rang. The number was long and unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. There was a brief pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in years. Raspier, deeper but unmistakable. "Isabel." I froze at the top of the stone steps. "It's your father." I didn't answer right away. My hand holding the phone suddenly felt heavy and the air around me thickened. He was silent for a moment, then said, "We need to talk. Maybe, meet in person." I let out a soft laugh. I wasn't sure if it was bitter or just tired. "After 5 years of silence, what makes you think I'd want to meet? There's a lot happening at the company. I don't want to discuss it over the phone." "That's so." I walked slowly to my car, opened the door, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. "I sent you over 10 emails asking to present a proposal. Not one reply. You once told 10 people to my face that I wasn't part of Morgan Group. So now, what am I to you?" He exhaled heavily on the other end. "I was wrong. And I know that." I rested my head on the steering wheel, eyes lifting toward the twilight sky. "I don't need you to admit you were wrong. I just don't understand why it took my name showing up in the press for you to remember I exist. Because now," he said slowly, "maybe only now, I realize you've done something none of us ever could." I didn't respond. An hour passed. I was still in the car. The engine off, no more calls answered. Messages flooded in, from old classmates, people in the industry, even from former clients who once turned me away because Evelyn was too small. But I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt like my heart was a still lake stirred by wind. Not calm but not stormy either. I used to dream of the day they'd have to acknowledge me. But now that it was happening, all I felt was a strange emptiness. As if, now that I was no longer a shadow of the past, I had to learn how to stand in the light. Alone, exposed, and with no place left to hide. And then I realized that light was never the scary part. I had just been taught to fear it for too long. That day the clouds were heavy. The light in the office felt dimmer than usual, even though it wasn't even 4 p.m. yet. I had just finished a design meeting for the Charlotte project when Natalie came in, her voice lower than usual. "There's someone waiting for you in the guest room." I looked up. Her expression was different. I slowly closed my laptop. "Who is it?" Natalie swallowed hard. "Mr. Charles Morgan." For a brief second, time seemed to freeze. I had imagined this moment countless times. How he would appear, what he would say, what his eyes would look like. But none of those versions prepared me for the reality of what was actually happening. I stood up, walked slowly down the hallway, my palms suddenly cold. When I opened the door, he was sitting alone, hands clasped, looking out the window. His back was still straight, his gray suit still perfectly tailored, but something had changed. His hair had gone almost fully white, and the eyes that once silenced boardrooms now seemed sunken with a weariness I couldn't describe. I said nothing. He turned when he heard the door, and for a moment when our eyes met, the room felt like it held only two people. Isabel. He nodded slightly. What do you want? Kept my tone steady. He looked at me for a long time as if trying to memorize the face he had ignored for years. We need you. I let out a quiet laugh. We. The family, he said, voice lower. Morgan Group is in trouble. Projects are stalled, shareholders are applying pressure. I'm not here because of pride. I'm here because I know you're the only one capable of turning things around. I stepped closer, placing my hand on the back of the chair across from him, but didn't sit. Do you remember? I asked quietly. In a meeting, you looked me in the eye and said, "You're not one of us." I met his gaze. And now, when no one else is capable, I'm suddenly your daughter again? He inhaled, eyes blinking. I was once your child. But you were never my father. He didn't argue. Didn't justify. He just sat in silence, so still it felt unnatural, like even denial had left him. A soft knock came at the door. Natalie peeked in, her voice careful. Sorry. Clark and Henry just arrived. They're in the conference room. I turned to Mr. Morgan. Did you tell them you were coming? I didn't, he replied. But they know. I nodded slightly. Then let's hear what they have to say. I walked into the conference room where Clark and Henry stood near the display board. They didn't wait for greetings. Clark approached immediately, his voice still dripping with the tone of the old days. Isabel, this is going too far. You can hate us, carry all the resentment you want, but we both know the company can't keep letting Evelyn eat up the market like this. I raised an eyebrow. So what do you want? Henry jumped in. A merger. Morgan Group will acquire Evelyn. You'll keep leading design, retain creative veto power. We can even consider a joint branding strategy. I looked at both of them, then around the room. The one lined with designs I had sketched by hand, where people they once rejected now worked tirelessly every day. Every corner of this building was my blood and sweat. None of them understood that. You think I spent 5 years building something I believe in only to sell it because you're having a rough time? Clark slowly sat down, his voice turning sharp. Isabel, if not for the company, then think about Dad. He's getting old. He can't take another blow. I replied coldly. I was the blow he never wanted to admit. I survived it. He'll have to learn how. Henry frowned. Do you really want to stand alone against the entire family? I walked over to the screen and pulled up a map showing Evelyn's project wins over the past 2 years. I'm not standing against anyone. I'm just not stepping back into a place that once pushed me out. No one said anything. I closed my laptop and walked straight to the door. Before I left, I turned back. You talk about merging. But Evelyn doesn't need Morgan. You're the ones who need me. They didn't respond. Just stood there for the first time, no longer looking so sure of themselves. I walked back to my office and closed the door. Morgan was still sitting there. When I looked at him, his eyes no longer belonged to a leader who once held the highest seat in the industry. They were the eyes of a father, belated, exhausted, and hollow. But the saddest part was that I didn't need that anymore. I was in a project meeting discussing rollout plans for the new development in Nashville when Natalie suddenly entered, holding a tablet. Her face was no longer composed the way it usually was, but as if something had gone beyond anyone's expectation. You need to see this, she said quietly, handing me the screen with a major news site open. At the top was a faded black and white photo of a young woman smiling brightly with a bold headline below. Revealed. Isabel Morgan is the biological daughter of legendary architect Evelyn Hart and 1993 financial whistleblower Michael Rowe. I sat motionless, my hand frozen before touching the screen. Inside me, something cracked wide open. My chest felt tight. I read slowly, line by line, names I'd never heard, truths I never thought I'd be allowed to know. According to the article, the reporter had traced archived records from a 1993 federal case, when my biological father, Michael Rowe, was arrested on charges of document forgery and aiding money laundering for a real estate conglomerate. But in a portion of documents never publicly released, he had provided information to the Department of Justice exposing massive fraud within Morgan Group. And soon after, through methods never fully explained, he was prosecuted in return, lost all custody rights, and vanished from the media record. A few months after the case, my mother, Evelyn Hart, a young architect once seen as the rising phenomenon in New York's public design scene, abruptly withdrew from all ongoing projects, terminated her contracts, and left the industry. In a leaked internal memo, one handwritten note read simply, "Funds received," terminating all claims related to the child. The child was me. I don't remember exactly when I looked up. Everyone in the meeting room was staring at me. No one said a word. I handed the device back to Natalie, my voice steadier than I expected. "Send this bulletin to legal. Ask them to verify its authenticity and begin preparing a formal statement. I'll handle the rest." In less than 2 hours, the story flooded social media. National news aired it. Political and financial analysts discussed the situation as a cultural bombshell in the business world. From a quiet CO, I became the victim of a 3-decade cover-up, as one commentator phrased it. I received hundreds of messages from strangers, from women's groups, from people who had been deceived, from children who had been denied the right to be called someone's child. One woman wrote, "You didn't just rebuild your life. You rebuilt our faith in justice." I didn't know how to respond. I walked through the small streets around the office that afternoon. The sky hung gray like it was weighed down by decades of layered memory. I thought about Evelyn, the woman who named me, who disappeared from my life like a shadow. I no longer felt angry at her. I just wanted to understand. The next day, I received a fast delivery envelope. Inside was a short handwritten letter, the paper yellowed like it had been stored away for far too long. No return address. Just a few lines. "Isabel, I didn't get to choose when we parted. But I believe that someday you would find your own way, not in the shadows but in the light. If you're reading this, it means you've made it through what I couldn't. And I'm proud of you. Evelyn." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. No tears. No doubt. Just clarity, like every missing piece had finally fallen into place. That same day, I received notice. 3 major shareholders in Morgan Group were pulling out simultaneously. In a televised interview, they made it clear, "We no longer trust the current executive board after the information that has come to light." One even stated, "If Isabel Morgan starts her own corporation, we're ready to back her." I didn't respond to the press. Didn't go on television. But my name no longer appeared with the phrase, "mysterious woman." Across headlines, they called me many things: the hidden heir, the architect of truth, the survivor who built her own empire. As for me, I just knew I was still Isabel. Not because anyone called my name, but because for the first time I truly knew where I came from and where I was going. No more vague questions. No more feeling like I needed permission to exist. I wasn't born into the Morgan family, but I had built a name no one could erase. That night, the Fairmont Hotel lit up like the whole city was watching a single place. The annual real estate gala was a nationally televised event, where the most powerful names in the industry gathered under a crystal dome to hand out perfectly polished trophies and exchange handshakes that rarely meant anything. I'd received the invitation 3 months earlier, but it was worded simply, "We respectfully invite Isabel Evelyn Morgan, Chief Executive Officer of Everlyn Design." No extra note attached. I thought I would decline. But something in me, not revenge, not even pride, made me quietly nod yes. I wasn't going to hear praise. I was going to place a final, meaningful period at the end of a chapter I'd once been forced to write in silence. The dress I chose was deep navy, floor-length, simple and modest, not to draw attention, but to make me feel grounded entering a place that once rejected me, this time with the calm of someone who no longer needed them. I went alone. No escort. No entourage. No cameras. Just me, and an official invitation engraved with my name, clear as a truth that could no longer be denied. As I walked into the hall, the lights hit familiar faces. I saw Mr. Morgan seated in the second row between Clark and Henry. All 3 stayed silent as I walked past. No one dared meet my eyes. And no one looked confident enough to smirk like they once did. The host began reading the list of nominees for the final category of the evening, CEO of the Year. When my name was announced, the entire hall erupted in applause. But I couldn't hear any of it. With every step I took toward the stage, the world seemed to slow down. I remembered that first windowless office, the rainy night I sat alone watching my account balance shrink, and the moment I handed my drawing to a small client who looked me in the eye and said, "You really understand us." I stood at the microphone. The spotlight beamed straight into my face. A sea of people beneath me, and among them were those who once believed I would never have a chance to stand on this very stage. I didn't look at them right away. I looked toward the back of the room, where Evelyn's team stood quietly clapping from the very last row. I started speaking slowly with no written speech in hand. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for allowing me to stand in front of you, not just as someone receiving an award, but as someone who was once told they'd never be worthy of one. The hall went silent. I saw Mr. Morgan shift slightly, his eyes dropping toward the floor. I was once called an outsider. Labeled the unofficial child, the unrecognized heir, the dreamer who didn't belong in a world built by titans. Many of you here may have heard those stories. Maybe some of you even believed them. I paused, letting the words settle beneath the lights. Tonight, I stand here to say to anyone who's ever been pushed out, silenced, or told they had nothing to offer, you don't need an invitation to sit at the table. You can build your own. One that's stronger, fairer, and where no one needs permission just to exist. There was a long, quiet moment, then the sound of someone exhaling softly and applause began. Sparse at first, then quickly building. It rolled across the room in waves, sustained, thunderous, unlike anything I had ever seen at previous galas. I caught a glimpse of the man in the front row, the one who shared my last name but never claimed me, slowly lowering his head. Clark and Henry remained still, their faces stiff as if choking down something bitter and unspoken. I bowed my head slightly, not to bask in the spotlight, but as a quiet farewell to the darkness I had once walked through. I turned and stepped down from the stage. Under the blinding lights, surrounded by echoing applause, I didn't feel celebrated. I just felt seen. Not because of the Morgan name, but because of who I had become. I'm not telling this story to seek pity or to condemn anyone. I'm telling it because I know there are so many people out there who felt the same way. People who were kept out simply because they didn't have the right name, didn't speak the right language, or didn't have someone powerful behind them. If you're one of them, someone who was once told you weren't enough, didn't belong, or weren't invited, then maybe you understand how hard it is to rise from the margins. But also how deeply proud you can be when you finally do. What do you think of this story? Have you ever been shut out of a place you thought you belonged? Leave a comment. I want to hear your voice. Because somewhere out there, someone might need to hear their own story echoed through someone else's. And if something in my story touched a piece of your own experience, don't forget to follow the channel. There are more stories to come, not just mine but real ones about family, identity, and the journey to find yourself in a world that doesn't always play fair.